There's a story of a wise old sage who is sitting on the banks of a river, and he's this contemplative person. So he's contemplating his relationship with God and what God calls him to do. And as he's sitting there, there's this young man who finds him and walks up and sits with him and begins talking to him. And he talks about his search and that he's left this busy life behind where he had so many other distractions, and he's come to search for God. And he said, I'm not sure what I'm missing. I can't seem to find God. How will I ever be able to find God? What am I missing here? And the old man got up and he walked down into the water, and he turned and he beckoned the young man to follow him. And as soon as they got into the water, the old sage grabbed the young man and pushed him under the water and held him down for what seemed like an eternity. And the young man was thrashing, and suddenly the sage let go of him, and the young man came up out of the water, and the sage turned to walk back to the riverbank. And the young guy was yelling. He said, "What did you do that for? I almost drowned." And the sage turned to him and he said, in that moment, what was most valuable to you? What was the one thing that you wanted? And the young man said, well, air, of course. I couldn't breathe. I needed air to breathe. And so, yes, that's the most important thing. And the sage looked at him and he said, when you find God to be as important to you as air, and you seek God in the same way you were seeking a breath of air, then you will find God. God is with you. Let us pray. God, who comes to us, seeking us, calling us, challenging us, inviting us, and wooing us, be with us now as we seek to understand what a deeper relationship with you might look like. Bless us as we come together as your church, and may the words that we share here together in the meditations of our collective heart be acceptable in your sight. For you, God, you alone are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. The story of Hosea is a fascinating story. It is one of the minor prophets, and it's really funny because as I was sitting down in here, my even though I don't think he has rabbinic training, but my rabbi here, Phil, was asking me, what are you going to do with Hosea? And so the thing that we have to understand that we tend to really focus on the judgment that comes out of the story, and the story of the marriage of Hosea to Gomer, who was a prostitute, and the subsequent naming of their children, these terrible names. The thing that it's a challenge, I have to admit. And I want to say at the outset that I approach this text carefully out of an abundance of respect for people who are the objectified in the Bible. And that's Gomer. Gomer's one of those, and we're in a patriarchal culture where women were simply kind of viewed as property, and where the woman in the story is objectified. But there's something else that's happening in the story, and this is what I want to dig down through and get to this, which is that the marriage of Hosea and Gomer is an allegory to the relationship of Israel to its God. And ultimately, if we look closely, it's an allegory of our relationship with God. God woos us and pursues us, yet we find it incredibly difficult to remain faithful to God despite our best efforts. So prostitution here is a symbol of unfaithfulness, and we understand that it's not always based on this intentionality. It sometimes includes lapses into ways of being that we simply know that are more comfortable for us, but that hinder our relationship with God and with one another. Notice that there's this judgment that we find throughout the story that ties the judgment of God to the fate of Israel in that moment. It's important to understand that this is written in the 8th century BCE, which is before Common Era. And so 8th century BCE, it's written around between 750 and 725. And it's during that time that the Assyrians conquer Israel. Now, it's not all of Israel like on the map that we think of today. It is the northern kingdom. We're 200 years past the time of David when the kingdom was united, and now we have, as George said, the northern kingdom, which is Israel, the southern kingdom, which is Judah. Israel also includes Samaria in that. And so this is the northern part of the country. It's Israel that is being attacked by the Assyrians. And in a sense, you stop and think, the Assyrian conquest must have felt to the people of Israel like God had given up on them. That's what this felt like. And so we have the naming of these children. We have Jezreel is how we say it in our talking. But when we think about the name of Jezreel, the name first appears in Joshua and in the time of Joshua. And then there's this place that we're told in this judgment of Israel that it will be in this valley of Jezreel that Israel will be conquered, which is it's interesting. Jezreel, the valley of Jezreel, is the plain of Jezreel, and it's this beautiful place. And those who, if you go with me on the trip next year, you'll see it. And it has to one side you have this beautiful Mount Tabor there, and then across that is the city of Megiddo, the ancient city of Megiddo. And what's interesting is that it's called Jezreel, but it's also called Har-Megiddo, from which we get the word Armageddon. So it's Har-Megiddo. And so it is this place where the war is going to take place and where Israel will be destroyed in the plain of Jezreel. And then we have this moving to the name of no compassion. I have no compassion on my people. And then the name not my people. Again, I really feel sorry for the kids that had to walk around with those names. But this story is telling us this is the image of what's born out of our unfaithfulness is this broken relationship with God, where we find this destruction, where there seems to be no compassion, and where we really believe that we are not my people. But there's a surprise that happens, and George pointed it out for us in the 10th verse. There's this wonderful twist in the story, and when we read that 10th verse, yet the number of the people of Israel will be like the sand of the sea, which can be neither measured nor numbered. And in the place where it was said, you are not my people, the last kid's name, you will hear now, children of the living God. You are children of the living God. So there's this hope of something that's ahead of us. And the interesting thing is that, and this is one of the key things that I take out of Hosea, is that God's relationship with us, despite our unfaithfulness, despite us perpetually walking away from God, not following God, not loving people as God has called us to love people, and in spite of that, God still seeks to be in relationship with us. It is not something where God is able to just say, all right, I'm done and you're finished. God will always be there. But we look for this forgiveness. We look for this renewal. And we ask, how does this happen? And as I was reading this text, I've been really, as you've heard, I've been really deep into the learning, into the research and the incredible work that Brene Brown is doing. And Brene Brown is a professor at University of Houston. But she also is a CEO of her own company. And Jen, I always kind of say this, Jen works in that company, and so I have I'm working with Jen for the fall. But the thing that Brene Brown talked about in this one lecture that was really powerful, she was talking about forgiveness. And she's done a lot of research on forgiveness, and one of the things that she really felt like she was missing it. Like she knew how to talk about shame and belonging and all these other things that are really important part of her research. But then she couldn't get to this thing of forgiveness. And she said that she really struggled with this, and she finally had kind of begun to work on this, but all she could really get to was the technical aspects of forgiveness and how forgiveness works and all this kind of stuff. And she said that the group that really gave her insight into this was a group of rabbis that she works with, and she's actually sent a lot of her work to them. They keep up with her work, and they said to her when they read her work on forgiveness, they said, "This isn't it. This isn't what you normally bring us. You normally bring us stuff that's down here, that is the deepest, most deep-rooted aspects of your work. So what's going on when we're experiencing shame and belonging, and you just go deep in that. But what you've done is you've just given us kind of this technical, analytical approach to forgiveness." And she said, "I just could not get my head around that." And she said, then one day I was in adult education at her church. She's an Episcopalian. She goes to an Episcopal church in Houston. And she said that Father Joe, who is a retired priest who was the dean of the chapel at a church she had been at, dean of a cathedral at a church she had been at. And she said that it was him who gave her this insight. So Father Joe's teaching adult education, and he started talking about forgiveness. And he said, in order for forgiveness to happen, something has to die. And she said that when she sat there, she thought something has to die. And she said, all of a sudden I went, and she said her husband leaned over and said, that was out loud. And then she grabbed her paper and she starts getting ready to write. And Father Joe tells a story about this couple that was in his church and who that the husband had an affair. And it really had just destroyed them and hurt them so badly. And what he said was that he met with the couple, and the husband said, I made this really horrible decision. It was a destructive decision, and I messed up, and I've pledged never to do it again, and I've asked her for forgiveness, and I just want us to get back to the way we were. And Father Joe said, no, that's not how it happens. He said, what you don't understand is in order for forgiveness to happen, something has to die. And so he asked the couple, he said, so what is it that died? And the wife is the one who spoke up, and she went, trust, the way we were, a picture of our family, the way we used to be, the dreams that we used to have, all that's dead. All that's gone. Now, I think we can build new ones, but what we have to do is let that die. And so, what Brene was saying was that you have to be willing to kill and let some things die in order to be able to find forgiveness. And so one of the things I've discovered in my life is the ways that I sin against God and other people, that it's really true. That there are certain things that just have to die for me to be able to experience forgiveness, and for me to be able to experience a relationship. And so, as a person who really is, as a white, cisgendered, heterosexual, middle income, privileged male in our culture, the thing that I realize is that privilege has to die for me. Privilege has to be something that I have to let die. I have to see my biases, my prejudices that I grew up with die. I have to see even perhaps some relationships with some people who really want to hold on to those prejudices die. And I see things that begins to really germinate for me. And one of the things that we find in the story of Hosea is that there is this death that happens. And it's really important that we understand that Israel, as far as it had strayed from God, it had to die. before it could experience this new life that God promised for it. So in between, you are not my people, and children of the living God is death and resurrection and hope. And that's what this story is ultimately about. It's about that place, that living hope. Israel is seeking forgiveness and resurrection. It experiences death and then new life. Resurrection only comes after death, born out of our relationship with God. And I think it's important that we hear that. And I think when we look at the passage in Luke, that we find Jesus talking about a relationship. And as he talks about it, as we find Jesus praying, Jesus isn't praying formulaic prayers. Jesus doesn't have like, okay, here's the formula, here's the thing I've got to say in order to be able to check that off my list and be able to say that, yes, now I have this relationship with God more secured. Jesus comes with his own authentic humanity, who he is, and he begins to pray to God. And it's his disciples that come to him. One of his disciples says, John's disciples taught them how to pray. Why don't you teach us how to pray? Because I don't have a formula for praying. And Jesus says, well, if you want a formula, here it is. Father, uphold the holiness of your name. Bring in your kingdom. Give us the bread we need for today. Forgive us our sins, for we also forgive everyone who has wronged us. And don't lead us into temptation. And it's ultimately about relationship. It's ultimately about what this relationship is. And the relationship that we have with God is a relationship where God will provide our need. God will be with us. And so if we derive anything from the formula, what we realize is that God is holy. God is the all-encompassing creator of all. We are the creatures in relationship to this creator, and that we are seeking God's kingdom to come into this world in a real way. Not in some sort of like pretend way or a way that it's enough, God, great, we got it, we can move on now. It's in a real way. And then forgive us. And then an interesting thing happened for me. And this kind of rebellious Protestant preacher really was taken. I keep up a lot with Pope Francis of the Catholic Church. And Pope Francis, I read an article here recently thoroughly because I was really digging into what he was saying. But he issued a statement about a new way to interpret this one line in what Catholics call the Our Father, the Lord's Prayer. And it's something that biblical scholars have known for a while, and it's made its way into Vatican biblical research. And now that the Pope has spoken it rises to a level of higher dialogue within the Vatican or from the Vatican. And it is the fact that this phrase, lead us not into temptation, is more correctly understood as we actually said it today when we were saying the prayer, which is be with us in our time of temptation. And I want you to hear that and how different that is. Lead us not into temptation. The truth of the matter is that I don't need to be led into temptation because I can find temptation all on my own. So I don't need God to lead me there. And what I want to know is God with me when I am experiencing those temptations? When I'm tempted to let those things that I've killed rise back up into my life that cut me off from people and from God. It's that temptation to make it about me and to place myself at the center of the universe. And I want God to be with me to remind me that there is a way that when I stumble and fall finally in this, that God's going to be there. And God can help show me other ways out. And then Jesus moves to this incredible story about the friend coming late in the night. We call it often the friend at midnight. In the middle of the night, he says, just imagine, in the middle of the night, you have a friend that comes in from on a journey. And of course, this is, they didn't have a way to get a phone call or a text message or anything to know. They did not have any way really of communicating other than if you had a courier or something. So they would show up, and this friend shows up late in the night, and this friend realizes, I have no bread. And there's enough, the hospitality, the rule of hospitality is you feed your guest who has arrived. So he goes next door to his friend, a neighbor, and he knocks on the door, and he's wanting to borrow 3 loaves of bread. Now, interesting thing, as I kind of set this scene in my mind, I see a village, and they're small little huts probably, and people, it's not like you had your own bedrooms and everything. And it's also like my daughter's house in Hawaii, where they have the louvered glass windows and no air conditioning, and you in fact know everything going on in every house around you. And and when you have that, you have relationship, you see, because my friend, at least one of her neighbors, there's one neighbor, and I know that he hears the kids screaming at least 2 or 3 times a day, and he's the guy who knows what's going on in the family. He knows that she's a single mom, and he knows that he can come and take her trash out, and he can do what he needs to do. And it's relationship. And so he comes and he knocks on the door, but the guy is that kind of a friend, is kind of like I would be probably in the middle of the night. Please go away. Don't bother me. The door's already locked. The kids are already in bed. And if I get up, I'm just going to disrupt all of this. And I love it because Jesus says, I assure you, even if he wouldn't get up and help because of his friendship, he will get up and give his friend whatever he needs because of his friend's brashness. In other words, he's just going to stand there knocking. I can just stay here knocking all night long. And, there's sort of this interesting image because, then I begin to ask, so is that the way, we have to keep bothering God until God finally gives that to us? I don't think it's that. I think it's about persistence, about us staying in that place looking for God's provision. What is it that God has provided? We heard Greg talk about the young man who listed his blessings. And what is it that God has provided for us? And if we keep looking, no matter our circumstances, we will find those blessings. And I think that's important for us to know. And it's not about magic. God is not Santa Claus. It is about knowing that God will provide for us because we are, as we learned in Isaiah, children of the living God, right? And so we seek this relationship. We knock on the door, not of a stranger, but of a holy parent who loves us. And that relationship will be enough. And it's in that relationship that we will discover a new harmony. And Jesus talks about seeking and finding, knocking and having a door opened. It's about this relationship that includes both dissonance and harmony. If you understand music at all, you understand that there's this level of dissonance and harmony that really kind of strikes at the heart of relationships. Back in 1996, we had a general conference. General conferences seem to be a topic for us preachers a lot. And at this general conference, we were discussing not only the issue that still is plaguing us today, but we also had a huge bit of legislation that dramatically altered the shape of ordained ministry. And we didn't really understand exactly how that was going to go because we thought we were going to get one thing and then we got something totally different. And it's turned out to be good in the end, but one of the things that happened is there was a lot of friction and conflict even getting there. And as Dr. Eric McKinney, who many of you know because he lives here in the community, he's preached here before. Eric was the chair of the Board of Ordained Ministry in our conference, and so we met with him and had the whole board meeting. And it was at First Methodist Arlington, and I remember sitting there, and Eric started talking about what had happened and what this thing, and we really still didn't have much clarity about everything that was going to be happening in ordained ministry. We were all pretty sure we still had a job, but that was about all we knew. And then he started talking about music. And I was listening to him, and I just started really tuning in. He said, in music, he said, part of what makes music is the dissonance. Notes that are just a half step apart, that don't work exactly together. And so Andy's going to help me out here because there's this dissonance that finally will lead to harmony. And in a moment, we're going to be singing a song that's a song that I used to teach whenever I was doing youth ministry, when I had hair, long hair, and was doing youth ministry, and it was the song Seek Ye First, and it's one that's in our hymnal. And I want you to hear if we go just to the place of dissonance on the end of that. Is that the end of the song? No, that's the dissonance there. The end goes like this. There we go. And the thing that is most important for us is to understand that relationships have dissonance. They have conflict. It's hard to be in relationship with God. It's hard to be in relationship with each other. It's hard sometimes really to be in relationship with your church. And yet, God promises harmony if we just stay in it, if we stay connected and we live more deeply into it.